Good morning, everyone. It's much quieter than the hearings in Harrisburg. You guys are good attendance. We appreciate your patience. First of all, we enjoy your beautiful area here. I found about 10 different places I'd like to go fishing shortly, so thank you for inviting us to your beautiful community. Thank Chairman Pickett and our colleagues around here for inviting us up here to have this policy hearing. As you may know, the policy committee likes to air different issues, try to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the community, what we can do better to help strengthen the workforce here in Pennsylvania and grow jobs. And this issue today is very much part of that. Before we get into the specific agenda, I also want to thank the school district for hosting us, and to our great staff for helping coordinate this, and our audiovisual crew who provides this information to members who cannot be here. So this will be streamed live, hopefully, and it'll be taped for members who are not in attendance, and they will be able to review it at their leisure. Without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Tina Pickett, our insurance chairman, but also a good friend.
Thank you, Chairman Benninghoff. Yes, we are delighted to be here today in this wonderful school district, the Elk Lake School District. And I want to thank everybody for being here today, very much so. And I do represent this district where you're sitting and listening here right here today. And I have all of Sullivan County and a part of Bradford County in addition to this western and southern part of Susquehanna County. So we do welcome you all to our Elk Lake School District and the Susquehanna County Career and Technical School. I always tell people that not only is Elk Lake a fantastic school district, but we have an absolutely sterlingly important and very much of a gem of our career and technical school here. We have a wonderful director. She works under the superintendent or with the superintendent here in this school district, and she's absolutely marvelous. We can't say enough about Dr. Davis, so we appreciate everything that she's doing to help us put this hearing together today. The Career and Technical Center here in this school district trains high school students, has an extensive adult education program, and I always say that they are going to make certain that every single student or adult that attends their programs has a great opportunity at a job or further education when they leave. They're very, very diligent about that and do a marvelous job. So we want to thank Dr. Davis and the Elk Lake Superintendent, Ken Cuomo, for welcoming us today and for all of the great work that they do with our adults and our young people to make this economically more sound in our area. We know today that here in today's setting, we're combining both education and workforce development, and that's the key of our topic today. We're looking for a greater access to rural broadband. And I wonder what my fellow colleagues are going to say today, but I can say without question that it is the number one issue in my offices these days. It is the number one email, call, comment on the street, or walk-in concern from people in the area. And I believe it grows daily. It is just reaching a crescendo, no question about it, that people are very concerned. It's no longer pleasure, recreational. It's an absolute necessity in life. And we are looking for solutions, and that's one of the things that we want to discuss here today. As a combined group, government and private, what can we do to make a difference in this area? Because we all struggle to some relative level with broadband in the rural areas. It's not just here, it's of course throughout the state and probably throughout the nation. So I hear it from constituents every day. I hear it from students. I hear it from schools. I hear it from businesses. I hear it from medicine. I hear it from so many different aspects. For certain, the provider in this area, the main provider in this area is our Frontier company, and they were we had hoped that they would be here today. I'm going to read you a message that they sent us. The Pennsylvania Telephone Association was going to be here, a gentleman named Steve Samara. You might see him on our agenda. He's unable to attend, and I'm going to read you a little bit of the message that they sent us. He is unable to attend due to an accident that he had, but we were unable to get someone from Frontier to be here today, and I'm going to read you what they said. The Pennsylvania Telephone Association forwarded over the hearing notice earlier today. We're sorry to hear that Steve Samara is now unable to attend Thursday's hearing. While Frontier appreciates the offer to attend and provide testimony, it comes at a time when our ability to publicly comment on broadband is extremely limited due to strict communications related to the FCC's upcoming Connect America Fund auction. Frontier cannot participate in any public event discussing broadband where even the slightest possibility that the matters discussed might touch on auction strategy or post-auction market structure. We are deeply concerned that Thursday's meeting may be heading in that exact direction. Frontier's actions are consistent with FCC auction quiet period restrictions as well as corporate-wide directive at Frontier. However, I can confirm Frontier has filed a short-form application with the FCC to potentially participate in the FCC's CAF II auction this July. Again, Frontier regrets not being able to participate in the upcoming hearing, but would be delighted to remain in consideration for future discussions, preferably in the late 2018 timeframe. And it's signed by Michael Cicchetти, Frontier Communications. I think I can quite definitely assure Mr. Cicchetti from Frontier that we'll be more than happy to include him in future discussions. So we would like to, at this point, turn this over to the superintendent of the Elk Lake Schools, Superintendent Ken Cuomo. He's got a couple of words of welcome for us and may tell us a little bit about how this affects his school district.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'll try that again. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Ken Cuomo, Superintendent of the Elk Lake School District and Susquehanna County Career and Technology Center. On behalf of our Joint Operating School Board, our faculty, our staff, our students, and our rural community, we'd like to welcome all of you here today. It is a pleasure and a privilege to host this event. We have this great opportunity in a rural setting to try and highlight this topic. It is a critical topic for our school system and for our students, the future employees and business owners in our county and our local area. So I do want to thank the panel and participants for choosing this site. It is a privilege. I hope that your travels here were enjoyable and nobody got lost. We are kind of in the middle of nowhere. I've lived here for 26 years. We are kind of, I would call, the gem in the middle of nowhere. Some of you may have thought you were lost, turning left and right and going over hill and dale, and then all of a sudden in the middle of nowhere, here's this facility. We're very proud of our facility, proud of the forethought by our previous superintendents, administration, and board to have this facility. And the Career Center. It is with the future in mind, which is what we try to focus on. So thank you for allowing us to host this. It is a critical topic for schools. We are charged with educating our youth for jobs that don't exist yet. We are not educating them for our past. We're trying to target their future, and that is a very difficult thing. And for our students and our businesses, we seem to be handcuffed by a lack of communication infrastructure. Our internet service is critical for distance learning, for Wi-Fi, for moving away from desktops to mobile devices, to be able to interface with business and industry. Our Career Center is a technology center, and probably the one thing that is holding it back, and it is one of the premier technology centers in the state. One of the things that is holding it back is the lack of a broadband, internet, and communication systems. It goes beyond just internet. Our cell service is very limited, as some of you may have noticed. And that, I think, dovetails with our broadband. There is one service provider locally, and I'm glad that Verizon is here, and then hoping in the future we can add more than one service provider. If you have Verizon, you probably don't have service here unless you go to my office where there's a booster. I am a Verizon person, so There you go. But it does play a factor into how, what we can do with our students in preparing them for their future, providing them options. And it's very difficult to spend all this time and money preparing our kids for jobs that are outside of our county, or outside of Wayne or Bradford County and the rural areas, because the infrastructure isn't here. And our goal is to see this area develop. It is the epicenter of the natural gas industry, huge business and industry. And I think, and I'm hoping that things will change with regards to this communications. I know there are other superintendents that would like to have been here today. They are experiencing some of the same issues. And so that being said, I am very interested in the testimony today because this directly impacts the opportunities that we can provide now for our kids for their future. And that is my biggest concern. So as a representative of our school system and our community, I do want to thank each and every one of you for coming today. And at this point, I will turn it back over to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Coma. And again, thank you very much for being our gracious host. I think you said it well. We've got to be producing educational opportunities for children of the future, for jobs of the future. Without further ado, I'd like the panel to introduce themselves and where you're from, just so that people know there's representation from across the state. Starting on my left with Representative Pfeiffer.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. My name is Mike Pfeiffer. I represent the 139th House District, which includes portions of Pike and Wayne counties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, friends. This is Representative Jonathan Fritz, proud to represent the 111th District, comprised of northern Wayne and about 2/3 of Susquehanna County. We are just outside of my district right here.
And don't forget that, Representative Fritz. I'm Representative Tina Pickett. This is my district in Susquehanna County. I also represent portions of Bradford and all of Sullivan. Thank you.
As you can tell, we're a shy group, but feel blessed to be working with these individuals. I'm Representative Benninghoff. I chair the policy committee. I serve areas of Center County, Mifflin County. We like to say we're the home of the wrestling champions and now NIT champions, Penn State.
Representative Karen Boback. My district is 117, Olive, Wyoming, and parts of Lackawanna and Luzerne counties. And I did get lost coming up, and my cell phone didn't work.
Good morning. I'm Senator Lisa Baker of the 20th District. I represent parts of Luzerne and Susquehanna County. I share Elk Lake School District with Senator Jean Yaw. Dr. Cuomo and Dr. Davis, thank you so much for allowing us to be here. When you said you're located in the middle of nowhere, my friend owns the Ricketts Glen Hotel, and his tagline is, conveniently located in the middle of nowhere. So I would say it's a delight to be here. I also represent all of Pike, Wayne, and Wyoming counties, so 5 counties. And I appreciate the invitation of the House Policy Committee to join you this morning on this very important topic that we've heard about education, but it's a public safety, it's a workforce, it is an education, it's across the board, and it impacts every community in northeastern Pennsylvania. So I appreciate your invitation. Thank you.
Good morning, Representative Aaron Coffer, Luzerne County, the 120th District. Although I lost cell phone reception, I did not get lost, so. That's true.
Good morning, Representative David Millard from Columbia County, 109th District. I didn't get lost, I rode with him. But I do want to congratulate you on such a beautiful area up here, and what a wonderful drive up it was, to take in all the beauty of this area. And I do want to recognize also a former colleague who is in the audience, Representative Sandra Major, and it was wonderful to have served with her a number of years and have her represent this area. Thank you.
Chairman Millard, you beat me to the draw, but I too want to say hello to Sandy Major. You're a tough set of shoes to fill, but you did a great job sending Johnny Fritz down, so thank you very much. Also want to acknowledge that Congressman Toomey's office has a representative here, Frank Mazza, if you want to wave your hand. So any money you need, go see this guy. Historically, we will have the panelists speak first and take questions second. So if you don't mind, we will start with the first group. I currently have them as Chris Brown, Central Bradford Progress Authority, Laurel Mueller from Soil Services, Lauren Stone, and Brad Adelman from Endless Mountains Health and Systems, as well as Commissioner Joseph Adams and Dennis Ford for the Wayne County government. How you want to start? Generally, I would just say you want to start with the young lady and go left to right, whatever works best. But anyhow, we're going to have you testify, and then we'll take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you for calling me a young lady. My name is Laurel Mueller, and I'm a certified professional soil scientist. And for 34 years, I have owned and run Soil Services Company. And we specialize in, what our motto says, it's all about clean water. We focus on on-site sewage facilities, also a delineation of wetlands, and we test soils for stormwater infiltration. About 8 years ago, we also started a company we launched called Mountain Wastewater Management to enable rural communities to have maintenance of sewage facilities which prohibited them from entertaining alternate systems. And we also sell and service all the alternate system products. And we cover about 40 counties from the Delaware River out to Potter County, almost down to Harrisburg. And the Career and Technology Center is one of our clients. We're working on so that they can create a building lot for their building program. So as an employer, we have 6 employees. We are all salaried. My husband and I have never had any other employment. For the last 34 years, it's been our sole source of income. And when we had the business for 17 years in the suburbs of Philadelphia and chose to move to our family farm in Sullivan County to be near aging parents. So we are caregivers to, we lost my husband's mother last summer, and we are still caring for his father across the street from our house. And our business was located in our garage office on our property. And it is a rare thing to be an employer in a county where all of the pallet mills and sawmills, most of them have closed, and the population is decreasing. And so, of course, we're on the rural, middle of nowhere, gravel road where we need services for communication. In the year 2000, that's when we moved from the suburbs of Philly to the village of Eldredsville near the other village of Forksville. And we started as we left the days of fax machine being the fastest communication, and we moved to dial-up services, and that was under Commonwealth Telephone. And shortly near the transition to Frontier Communications, acquiring Commonwealth, we went to a DSL service. And then when all of our employees started bringing devices to work, broadband hogs of iPads and phones, we had to add a second DSL. And we have always paid a commercial rate. We pay more than all of our neighbors, and we pay for the services that come down our street, and then the phone company lets our services away to all the neighbors so they can watch movies and buy things on Amazon. We've had many, many unkept promises. We have been promised program changes, card changes, things that were going to upgrade our slow download speed, which is typically 0.3 to 0.5 meg. We are promised 1.5. We are sold 6 meg. So while we have been offered more and more commercial level service and improvements, we can't get past 0.5 meg. And what does that mean? And when you're trying to run a business, it means you have to do software updates. And for us, we have to drive our computers to Williamsport an hour away to upgrade program software. We try to download geology data from our state geology service, topography maps, geology maps, soil maps, and often you're faced with, this will take 20 hours to download. Come back tomorrow, and you may, if you don't get disconnected, find you got your data. I wrote an online training program. I had to send my SD card in the mail, in the snail mail, to the platform because I couldn't upload my video. Cloud storage is an impossibility. We can't upload our data to the cloud so fast enough to get it there. And when we try to do remote access when I travel, and I do a lot of travel and try to get in, I stay in a hotel to work Pike County, try to get back to my office on remote access, and it's like there's a hard shield over Eldredsville that I can't break through. I can't get data in, I can't get data out, I can't find a photo, not unless I want to wait 2 hours to get a single file. So we have sought help, stamped our feet, politicked, screamed, pleaded, cried, to Frontier, to Verizon Wireless, to all the cell companies, the satellite companies. I've been to my governor, my state representative, my commissioners. I went to a special technology work group at Penn State. I've been through the emergency services. I have cried and pleaded. When I finally faced asking, what can we pay to get a proper service here, I was told a T1 line would cost $800 to $900 a month for my little business that has 6 employees. And so that was when we finally decided to move. And our solution was to move away from the parent that we are watching, also to take all of my company volunteers. We are all firefighters and local EMTs. We had to move away from our fire company, so we aren't available during the day, to go to the village of Forksville. But we bought a building that where Zito Media offers 100 meg service, and we moved in, and we also are creating other office spaces. That's my 5-minute timer. I don't know how to shut it off. Can you? I got to tell you the final salt in the wound. I could crucify Frontier for what they are allowed to do to rural businesses. And the final salt in the wound was we thought we'd get them out of our lives. We were going to a voice over IP computer-based phone system, but we still need to pay $80 a month to keep 2 advertised phone lines in. I filed an FCC complaint because you're supposed to be able to port your numbers, and Frontier has a special arrangement with the FCC where, because they brought the rural communities internet services, they do not have to port their number. They can keep and own their number forever.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking you all for conducting these hearings today to address rural broadband needs. My name is Chris Brown, and I'm with the Progress Authority. The Progress Authority is a certified designated economic development agency for Bradford and right here in Susquehanna County. It is a grassroots economic development agency formed by local business people and government for a true public-private partnership. 2018 marks our 25th year as an IDA, Industrial Development Authority, Industrial Development Corporation, and General Purpose Authority. Like many economic development groups, it strives to facilitate private investment and job support. The Progress Authority identifies key issues that must be overcome to promote true economic development, and its leadership continually meets with area business leaders and officials to identify vital needs to improve rural development. We're very aware of and have reviewed the Center for Rural Pennsylvania's assessments and surveys on broadband detailing the challenges in rural community. They are having a hearing right now as well in Wellsboro to address very similar needs. The northern tier counties are among some of the most geographically largest in the state. It is no secret that the lack of capacity for useful and reliable broadband is plaguing many in our rural counties. Like many rural service delivery systems, there are not enough residents and businesses along the vast stretches of roadway to make a user-driven business plan work properly. It is no secret that for many years, telephone companies have relied upon subsidies to assist them in providing last-mile service. Still, gross deficiencies in widespread, affordable coverage persist because insufficient attention has been paid to the commercial sector and relevant governmental agencies to the widening gap in the middle-mile infrastructure. The stakes could not be more serious, and unfortunately contribute to the Progress Authority's interrelated concerns of inadequate public safety, disparate access to governmental and educational services, haphazard or non-existent recourse to telehealth, and other personal and business activities of daily living are lagging in rural economic development. Farmers and rural families struggle with inadequate service as well. However, both the lack of middle-mile investment and increase in bandwidth demand have created a dilemma that far exceeds any one issue for rural communities. Rural citizens, governments, schools, and businesses have no less need for quality, reliable broadband than anyone else. Like it or not, this is what our lives revolve around now. Unfortunately, traditional subsidies have been targeted to internet service providers in the hopes that funding them will result in increased end user bandwidth. In many cases, when funding becomes available, it requires a minimum speed and a timetable for development. However, although we in Bradford County and Susquehanna County have waited 10 years for private sector development, the 2008 standards of 1.5 megabytes per second have not been met yet. Our experience in Bradford and Susquehanna counties has been that supporting the service providers without targeted, time-sensitive deliverables in the way of middle-mile infrastructure investments has not resulted in any considerable improvements to the broadband accessibility. The Progress Authority has been told by service providers that the speeds our businesses and residents realistically need cannot be met within a meaningful time frame or at meaningful rates. Adding insult to injury, there's also a digital chasm between the minimum standard speeds for bandwidth are, as defined by the FCC, and what is realistically required for the number of connected devices in today's businesses and households. Thus, collectively, the digital divide in Bradford and Susquehanna counties broadens because the state government's aspirations remain diffuse. The standards to which the providers are held are not meaningfully updated for modern demands, and the expectations of service providers remain unclear or incomplete. Collectively, these problems have resulted in any infrastructure money the service providers may have available to them used inefficiently. It is the opinion of the Progress Authority that the rural dilemma described above could be improved, if not eliminated, with an appropriate public-private partnership committed to the construction of critical middle-mile infrastructure, which currently does not exist. In light of ever-increasing modern demands and the unavoidable topography and diffuse population of northern Pennsylvania, there is no substitute for fiber optics as the foundation for support of numerous forms of communication with unlimited capacity. From the day it was invented, fiber optics has been the standard technological regime under which the vast majority of all telecommunications and related applications continue to be developed. Because of this fact, fiber optics and technology backed by fiber are and will continue to be the highest and best use for funds for broadband development. While it would be admittedly a long-term investment, funding for middle-mile development with the potential of virtually limitless extensibility and growth is critical. If the middle mile is available, various type end users could take advantage of an otherwise unavailable or extremely expensive and limited service market, and with that advantage, bring rural Pennsylvania firmly to the 21st century and beyond. I could go on and on about poor service and the issues with broadband. However, I'm here to propose a solution. Knowing that there are so many interested parties between electrical infrastructure, natural gas, governmental and public safety bodies, educational entities, and the public, it only makes sense to facilitate all these needs by developing the middle mile, thus changing the various cost structures. Recognizing the critical problem, the Bradford County Commissioners commissioned a detailed engineering study through the Progress Authority in February of 2017. After consultation with engineering and legal professionals, the Progress Authority has, for the past year, been taking steps to develop what has been dubbed the Bradford County Open Access Network. The Open Access Network, once developed, would be a fiber optic middle mile addition to the network to improve connectivity throughout Bradford County. This strategic network will specifically construct the truly redundant middle mile that the private sector has been unable or unwilling to construct. With the development of redundant dark fiber loops throughout Bradford County, the Progress Authority can construct a long-lasting, self-healing backbone to support all means of communications. Emergency services, microwave, cell phone towers, and wireless communications will be directly strengthened with a well-positioned and impactfully sized fiber optic network. Susquehanna County has recently followed suit and authorized $175,000 of county funds to be used as match for an ARC grant to complete a similar study and plan. Using the backbone of our electrical distribution system, Phase 1 of the area's specific engineering design is complete, and a submission of over 3,000 permit polls has taken place. The Progress Authority has also requested a PUC declaratory order to determine whether or not dark fiber infrastructure project would be deemed a public utility and whether any particular permission from local exchange carriers is necessary. Interestingly, in conjunction with this, we have sent out our intentions to the 3 LECs, which is local exchange carriers, with our intention to provide speeds of 10 gigs for commercial customers and 1 gig for residential customers to gauge their willingness to provide those speeds. Their responses have been less than hopeful, though not entirely unexpected. Building out fiber networks in our area anytime in the near future apparently does not fit their business model. Their target returns on investment are not met in rural areas. Where the LECs do not tread, the Progress Authority will. It will construct what the last mile service providers do not want to construct, the high-cost middle mile. The redundant dark fiber network will be open to the last mile providers and those who will light it themselves. This opens the possibility of existing smaller service providers to compete as well as bring additional service providers to the area. The only condition is that no user can occupy more than a certain percentage of the resources of the network. This project is roughly $10 million just for Bradford County alone. So the money is meaningful. And additionally, Susquehanna County is waiting for what their project would be, what their middle mile infrastructure would look like, and to get a final number with that. We recognize that no one funding source can accomplish this alone. This is why a public-private funding mix is critical. We ask that serious consideration be given to providing rural funding for middle-mile construction available to governmental agencies, nonprofit organizations, or private companies in recognition of the fact that purely private infrastructure development is only profit-driven to date, has not adequately happened in our area. Much like sewer and water infrastructure, broadband infrastructure development needs to be subsidized and has been proven in other parts of the country. The critical component now is investment in the rural model that is developed in Bradford County. With careful engineering, the model can be duplicated throughout rural Pennsylvania. Let us support service providers by constructing what has not made good business sense for the last mile providers. Quality broadband is well beyond a useful amenity. It is critical to everyone's life. While this topic is pretty important to me in my career, it's also important to me in my personal life. My wife and I have 4 children, one of which is terminally ill. Unfortunately, she has a mitochondrial disease and she's unable to breathe on her own. She is wheelchair bound, and much of her daily activity is constrained. When her diseases progressed to the point that she needed to be on a trach, she was in the hospital for 2 months. We were not able to bring her home unless we had adequate broadband connectivity in our home, because much of her equipment is Wi-Fi capable. It can be calibrated, it can be monitored and read from distance, from her medical providers, from a distance that saves us having to go out into the community and having to have unnecessary travel for her care. Along with that, she's 7 years old. She, just like all of the other 7-year-olds around, she wanted to go to school. And unfortunately, with her compromised immune system, that wasn't possible. Wyalusing School District stepped up with my wife, and they figured out a way for her to attend school and get the interaction that she so desired from her peers, and also get the education. Through the use of a robot, she's able to sit at home through an iPad, see the kids see her, she can move the rover inside the classroom, she hears the teacher can call on her, she can have all of the flexibility of being in the classroom right from home where she's safe and not around the germs. This would not have been possible if we didn't have adequate Wi-Fi. When we first started with this technology, we lived in an area where we were serviced by cable internet. And a year ago, we moved further into the country where cable internet wasn't serviced. We were stuck with Frontier. And unfortunately, her education would have stopped right at that point if I hadn't taken extraordinary measures ourselves to build our own network that would connect to one of the very few fiber-fed cabinets that Frontier has in Bradford County. If we hadn't made that investment ourselves, had been fortunate enough to be able to make that investment ourselves, her education wouldn't be possible right now. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, before we move to the healthcare providers, you had repetitively used the word middle mile development. Just for some of our listeners who may not be here, if you could just expand on that quickly.
Middle mile is the space between where service currently is and where the internet service providers need it to be able to bring it to your home. So it's that infrastructure that's in the middle that often is the most costly, because for us to go from this rural community to that rural community, there's quite a few miles in between, and it's those miles that the infrastructure needs to be built up, because if you involve the internet service providers and they have to bear the burden of all of the investment, they're not going to do it.
Thank you for the explanation. If the Endless Mountains Health System would like to go next. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the House Policy Committee, for providing an opportunity for Endless Mountains Health Systems to provide comments on rural broadband issues. As a rural health care delivery system, Endless Mountains Health Systems relies heavily on the use of outside services such as teleradiology, reference laboratory, and our remotely hosted electronic health record. These services are mission critical to provide for prompt, efficient, and effective care to our patients. The broadband services available for rural areas are limited and expensive compared to the availability and cost in urban areas. In an environment where healthcare providers are tasked to do more with less reimbursement, the cost problem is significant. With a lack of specialty providers, more and more rural facilities are moving to telemedicine to support the needs of their patients. This telehealth shift will require more and more use of broadband access. Future shifts in delivery of care and monitoring of patients may occur within the patient's home, as said by Chris, and the same access and cost issues that face a healthcare system will face a healthcare consumer relative to reliable and affordable broadband access. The use of broadband for live streaming of a healthcare encounter, moving image files from our X-ray, CT scan, and MRI units all require bandwidth that is either unavailable or cost prohibitive. Endless Mountains Health System serves a population that is already medically underserved, geographically isolated from access to many specialty care providers, and economically disadvantaged, as quoted by the U.S. Census Bureau estimates in 2016 of being at a poverty level of 12.7% for Susquehanna County. Unavailability or cost-prohibitive access to broadband services makes it more difficult to be competitive in an environment that is becoming ever more connected. I would like to turn now over to Brad Edelman, our Administrative Director of Information Technology and Informatics, who will provide additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start with the simple fact that according to the FCC, 32.9% of Susquehanna County residents lack a single broadband provider. For us, that means initiatives into areas such as telemedicine face stiff challenges right from the beginning. DSL service, for those who have it, has proven to be mostly unreliable and sometimes unusable for all but the most of basic internet activities. We have employees who have dropped the DSL service after new cell towers were constructed because they were fortunate enough to have good cell coverage. The downside of cellular data usage is the enforcement of data caps and transfer rate throttles by carriers, especially in rural areas where infrastructure is limited. For many rural residents in the county, cell coverage is not always available even when a cell tower is nearby. You take the example of here where Verizon is the only carrier. The growth of natural gas development has increased the number of towers and the reach of cellular service, but is still not readily available or reliable enough for applications like telemedicine. The lack of a reliable high-speed data connection would turn a telemedicine session into an extremely frustrating encounter for both the patient and the provider. For those residents fortunate enough to live in an area where DSL is available, the cost of a typical 6 megabit connection in Susquehanna County would buy you a 15 megabit connection in Harrisburg. A 25 megabit connection here, where available, would cost about $80 a month. In Harrisburg, it would be $50. An alternative satellite-based internet package for the same 25 megabit connection would cost $99 a month. Even with the data throttling and limits imposed by satellite, a lot of people who can afford it think it is a superior alternative to DSL. For Endless Mountains Health Systems, community access to affordable and reliable broadband service also affects our ability to meet federal reporting requirements. Programs such as the Electronic Health Record Incentive Program currently require participating organizations and providers to interact with patients electronically via the internet. For example, a physician must participate in what is known as coordination of care through patient engagement that consists of numerous measures that can only be met by interacting with patients online. With a large portion of our patients living in rural, underserved areas, The challenge of complying with the current requirements of between 5 and 25% patient participation becomes extremely challenging. We are fighting for every single patient we can get when it comes to online activity compliance. And to make matters worse, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has made it very clear that in the future they would like to see higher thresholds for these measures, as well as the incorporation of additional measures requiring patient online involvement. That's a brief glimpse into how broadband access affects our interaction with our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finish out the panel with Wayne County Commissioners, John Adams and Dennis Ford. Thank you, gentlemen.
Hi.
Joseph, just want to make sure you knew that, Tina. Thanks.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. I first want to introduce my IT director, Dennis Ford. He's here for technical support. I'm not a technically capable person. He certainly is. So any questions that you were going to have that become more technical, I'm certainly going to refer them to Dennis. He does a great job for our county and our community. And I do want to say that we are extremely well represented by our legislature. Lisa Baker, Mike Pfeiffer, Jonathan Fritz do an exceptionally good job with working with us and represent us and our communities very well, as did Sandy Major. So I want to thank you for that as well. I started my career as a business manager for a school district, spent 12 years there, 15 years in the corporate world and banking world, 2 years as a superintendent, and now I'm a county commissioner. So there's a little bit of a broadness to my background, and all of that was very critically driven by the opportunity for economic development, the opportunity for economic growth, and we have determined at the county that economic growth is the number one initiative that we were working on, and the reasons that we're struggling right now with that is. We had a tech committee, WEDCO, which is Wayne Economic Development Corporation. We had some tech business professionals, county planners, our IT department, workforce partners, and commissioners all sit on a panel to try to figure out how we can get high-speed broadband. It's the number one detriment to economic opportunity for our citizens and for people of our community. And obviously, we've heard already, the vendors aren't interested. There's not enough density. There's not enough profitability. Their metrics don't work to bring it. We actually had a vendor that was trying to get a large-scale fiber pipe to Honesdale, and the reality of that vendor, after many meetings and a commitment on their part that they were going to do it, the make-ready pole costs and the regulatory environment around that made it become completely unaffordable, and that's a shame. They were willing to invest in a pipe to get high speeds to us, but the pole-ready stood in the way. Wayne County is 59th out of 67 counties for upload speeds. And it's not a coincidence that we're 59th out of 67 counties for income. There's a direct correlation to that. And that's an enormous problem for us. If we can get internet and high-speed broadband service, it's 4 to 5 times the cost of urban and suburban costs. So it's not competitive, and it's unaffordable, especially when it comes to being 59th lowest out of 67 counties in income. Economic growth absolutely, relies on high-speed bandwidth. Many of our areas you can't even get dial-up. Many of our areas we don't have cable service, so people are stuck with no opportunity. Obviously, business needs it to be maintained and to expand and to relocate to our area. 1 in 5 workers, this is according to Forbes, 1 in 5 workers in our country spend significant time working from home, which means if you don't have high-speed broadband at home, you can't work from home. It's an enormous competitive disadvantage for Wayne County. 70% of startups in our country, entrepreneurial startups, start at home. If you can't start it at home, you can't start up and you can't grow a business. Again, we're not competitive. Real estate marketplace, one of the main questions asked is what's the availability of high-speed broadband? So it's a depressant to the real estate market. And then local business obviously is really struggling to even stay, let alone expand. And in the attracting of new business is almost non-existent to our area because of that. We're fortunate enough to have been awarded an LSA grant, thank you to many people who are sitting on the panel, to bring a very large fiber optic pipe from Laurel Communications in South Canaan in Wayne County to the Sterling Business and Technology Park, which is 1/4 of a mile from Route 84. Many lots available, highly developed, $15 million complex spent there. Right now there is one operating building, which is a fire truck company, Sullivan, employs 55 people. They do a great job. There's another building being built, and we're actually building a spec building at this point. The number one deterrent for business to move there and employ people is the non-access to high-speed broadband. We got a $350,000 LSA grant and partnered in the private sector with Laurel Communications, and right now it's on hold because of make-ready pole regulations and costs. Incredible that we're ready to go, everything's in place, and we can't get it there. And if we don't get it there, we can't get economic development. We can't build the buildings and have business come there and occupy and those lots and provide jobs and economic opportunity for people of our community. The topography, I don't have to go into that. Wayne County is mountainous. It's rural. Topography for Wi-Fi or wireless connections and the availability of fiber hubs to the towers is almost non-existent. That might improve in the future, but the reality is we need something now. Wayne County is within 2 hours of New York City and Philadelphia. It's a destination due to clean air, clean water, abundant land, recreational opportunity, terrific public schools, some of the best in the state, progressive and expanding health care, an excellent upgraded power grid, access to major highways, 80, 380, 81, 84, the Turnpike, the Casey Highway, excellent non-obtrusive local governments. What we're missing is the opportunity to have high-speed internet so that people can live, work, and bring their businesses to our county. Wayne County has the largest declining student population by percentage of all 67 counties in the state of Pennsylvania. Why is that? The farming communities are struggling because of the issues economically with that. The manufacturing sector that some of our people used to be able to go to the Scranton marketplace to work has slowed and or closed, and we don't have the opportunity for entrepreneurship because we don't have high-speed broadband. So our student population is declining faster than any place else in the state. We're not competitive for employment, and not having high-speed broadband services is the sole deterrent to that, and primary deterrent to that. Our ask is to remove the regulatory requirements, especially for make-ready poles. Make it certainly an arena that can be either subsidized or controlled from a cost standpoint. It's ludicrous to think that it can cost $3,000 a pole to make them ready, which immediately stops the progression of anybody wanting to attach a high-speed fiber network to a pole. Second thing is we're looking to the future, the potential to earmark radio frequencies for wireless operations that may occur in the future, as opposed to being able to have them sold all to the telecom companies. And third, provide funding and or tax incentives for public and or private investment to expand high-speed broadband services to rural America. I want to, again, thank you for the opportunity to present before you, and we're very appreciative of you hearing our comments. Thank you.
Dennis, are you there on console, or did you have other comments you wanted to add to that? Okay, very good. We will take questions from the member. Excuse me. Again, thank the panelists for excellent testimony and very helpful. Gives you a little better flavor for what's going on in other parts of the state. Gentleman to my left, Representative Pfeiffer or Fritz? Okay. We'll start with Representative Fritz.
Mr. Chairman, would I be allowed to ask 3 different questions?
We'll give you a rookie lenience this
right.
one time.
Laurel, if I can kindly ask, how much do you pay a month for your internet connection? If you want to give me a roundabout, that's fine. I'm trying to make a point here to comparing costs.
I want to say approximately $250 a month for what we had, and we actually got it down when we went to the high-speed area. And it's a combination of a phone, voice over IP, and internet, so it's a package, and it's approximately $200 a month now.
I'm just trying to illustrate the amount of overhead that adds to a small business.
And I consider that low with the options we were looking at. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, thank you, Chris. I want to ask you, if I may. You personally funded the routing of a connection cable to a fiber-fed cabinet box. And again, I want to illustrate the expense here, the exorbitant expense oftentimes. How much did that cost you? And do you run that over poles or underground? And were there any challenges dealing with the owners of those poles if you ran it using the poles?
Luckily, my property adjoins where it was, so it was just mine, is buried cable, and it was $2,500.
Okay,
to run that just from the cabinet right up to my house.
How many linear feet would you say?
1,500.
Okay, so still $2,500 is a sizable investment.
But also had to commit with Frontier to their highest package of an additional $125 a month.
Okay, thank you.
I need to correct my answer because we also have Verizon wireless accounts and boosters, et cetera. So I want to throw another $500 a month into being able to maintain that for all of our employees and in our trucks. And it's amazing. We had the only like 3 bars in the whole neighborhood when we put our booster in. So the gas industry would park on our lawn to be able to get, when they worked our area, gas pads just to be able to receive it. But anyway, the overhead is actually higher when you consider combination of Frontier and Zito Media and Frontier and Verizon Wireless. So I want to boost that up to, more like $700 or $800 a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
Usually when we're at a school district and we're talking about boosters, it's a little different topic. So thank you. There was made mention, Commissioner Adams, about $3,000 per pole cost. And that begs for me a curiosity, and maybe this is for our next group of panelists, but perhaps the answer will come from you folks. To stretch a mile, how many poles?
I'm not sure, but I believe the pole lengths were between 500 and 1,000 feet maximum. So a mile would be, there'd be what, somewhere between 15 and 20 poles depending on topography. So, do the math, it becomes just unaffordable.
So times that by 3,000 per pole.
Well, yeah. So I mean, you're looking at potentially $30,000 to $40,000 a mile just for pole-ready access, not counting the cost to actually hang the fiber and provide it. And your question regarding monthly costs, the county's monthly cost for our broadband is $3,800 a month, is what we spend. We have 450 employees. We have a very spread out campus. We have a couple of locations, and we have a business incubator. And our cost to get the requirements that we needed is $3,800 a month, which becomes almost ridiculously unaffordable for business to be able to come in and get that level of service and be able to be profitable and provide opportunities for jobs.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you all very much for your testimony.
Chairwoman Pickett, then Senator Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly have many constituents who come into me and comment that they're paying $130 a month at a residence to get very little accessibility. It's not the money that bothers them, it's the lack of accessibility, but the combination bothers them, the fact that they're paying that money and they don't have any kind of reasonable access. Chris Brown, I just wanted to wonder if your development authority has had an opportunity to really look over the funding, somewhat minimal in the big scheme of things, but still we hear the federal government mentioning some money coming down. We hear the state government just recently, the governor's office just recently talking about some potential funds and setting up an office to monitor such a thing. Do you see it as reaching out this far and being useful to us? Have you had a chance to study any of that?
Most of the funding, particularly through the state and federally through the USDA, is for last mile providers. So it's for the actual internet service providers. So for our particular project, there isn't a ton of funding available for us to build the middle mile because we're not actually bringing the service to the home. It is for the last mile providers or the internet service providers. And then what you're dealing with are the larger companies that need a return on investment. So they can get some of the subsidized money, but the return on investment still needs to be there for them to make the investment in our rural communities. It's much better spent for them to go to less rural areas.
So in keeping with the commissioner's comments and yours, we would be able to say that even though the federal government, the state government is attempting to rise to the problem, they still are not touching what is going to be the first major roadblock that they're going to run into. And that is, how do we build that first major expensive area? Have you had a chance to talk with any of the rural electric companies regarding their interest and what blocks them?
We are. They actually are in a unique position because they have the infrastructure already. They own the poles. There is one rural electric cooperative to our north that is going full force with a project. They're readying themselves to apply for the CAF2 funding to help subsidize their project. The rural electric cooperative that covers Susquehanna County and Bradford County is more reticent. They are very hesitant to get into a service where they're not the monopoly of it. But it does make sense to look to them because they do own the infrastructure. But in the same sense, they're also not internet service providers. So it's a branch out of their business plan.
To our north, is that in New York State then?
No, actually Tioga County.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Quick follow-up to that. Was that discussion allowing fiber optic access to be put on the poles versus them providing the fiber optic? I mean, and again, I'm a novice to some of this stuff, but I think in telephone communications, people have towers and some of that stuff gets shared with EMS and different types of entities. Is there the ability to physically use the infrastructure that the electric companies already have for fiber?
Yeah, their infrastructure is the poles, and by being able to attach fiber cable to those poles, that is the infrastructure. So the model that the rural electric cooperative is looking, they're actually buying the fiber and putting it up themselves. Our project is we're buying the fiber and attaching to the electric poles, primarily through Penelec, actually.
Yeah, I mean, my question was basically along those lines. Can't we have some kind of collective cooperative agreement that we utilize your poles and run our fiber? I mean, to me, that merits a discussion rather than pounding up more poles.
It definitely merits discussion because ultimately it will help them as well. They have rural substations that everybody's going to smart meters as far as electrical service as well. That needs broadband for it to work. So there can be a partnership that is there.
That sounds like a key step to go that direction. Senator Baker.
Good morning. Chris, thank you for your testimony. Tell us your daughter's name.
Abby.
Abby. And as I listened to you, the peace of mind that you were explaining to all of us about how your family is navigating a difficult medical emergency in your family, thanks for sharing that and helping us to understand what that means to a family and how technology could help serve other families like yours. So we'll say good things and prayers for your daughter.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. You talk about how can we move forward. We know that the Department of Revenue has issued a bulletin related to the federal write-off on the bonus depreciation through the federal legislation that would allow companies who invest in Pennsylvania to write that off. The potential of this Department of Revenue bulletin could mean that we will lose billions of dollars of investment here in Pennsylvania. There's a bill, both a Senate bill and a House bill, one that passed the House already and is before the Senate, that would address that. Do you believe that's crucial policy for us to look at, the bonus depreciation for that investment?
I would definitely say yes.
And as I look at our chairman, Joe, have you looked at that bonus depreciation, and can you share for us what that impact potentially could be? Because if we're not competitive in investing here in Pennsylvania through that bulletin, the cost to Pennsylvania will be huge and significant.
And especially in rural America, there won't be any return. If you can't get the bonus depreciation, you can't get the schedules to work the way from a financial standpoint, it's going to stop anybody from going to an area that doesn't have the density to pay for it. I'm not an expert on that bill, and not familiar with enough detail to make any more comment. But the reality is, if you're suburban and there's density and there's return on investment, things may happen. If there's not, how are you going to get to the point where you can even provide it to areas so that they can have a level playing field from a competitive standpoint? It just doesn't happen.
I'm sure we'll hear from some of the others, but I think as a policy matter, the House has already taken the bill up, and it's my expectation that the Senate will continue to do that. And I think for us to remain competitive, that's a key component. You talk about eliminating regulatory barriers as well. I've had conversations with the Public Utility Commission and commission members as they've gone through their reappointment process. And one of the areas I believe that we need to look at is the poll issue. And so I just want to acknowledge that and say that there are members of the commission looking at it, and all of us as well. I think that is a key component to how we address that. The cost barrier is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's a public utility. I mean, it's the equivalent of emergency operations. It's the equivalent of having a telephone. It's the equivalent of having power. It's not just business economic development. I mean, the reality of the poll scenario, and people don't realize when they say make ready poll, well, why does it cost so much? Well, you have to have there's distances, I guess, and this is all regulated as well, between the power and the telephone and the cable and the fiber. And if you have to move any of those things, each one of those expensive corporate operations has to come out and move them to provide. So to me it's the equivalent of this is necessary from a public safety and a communications scenario to regulate it enough that you can actually make it happen, as opposed to having the owner of the pole hold you up for 90 days to review the engineering and then come to you with a cost of $4,000 a pole to be able to hang fiber, which is what's necessary to provide the broadband that we're all been talking about.
And perhaps it's a liability issue that we need to provide some sort of Good Samaritan immunity or something along those lines that protects that, because obviously some of the utilities are responsible and then maybe are saying that they have to engineer it just so because they're in charge. So I think we need to put our thinking cap on how to do it, and I appreciate all your comments.
Great. Thank you.
Representative Coffer, followed by Representative Millard. Chairman Millard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm doubling back with Chris. You said it was a $10 million project for the 3 phases that you're discussing.
Correct.
Has there been any commitments or anything from any of the providers that they are going to get involved in this last mile for the $10 million investment? I got to assume there's something discussed.
Right? We've actually had some internet service providers that have looked at this rather than, instead of looking at it as competition, as opportunity for them to expand into a market where they currently don't want to make the investment in, but can if we make the middle mile investment. investment. So there has been some internet service providers. In particular, there's been some wireless providers. Because of our rural nature, there is going to be parts of the county that will not be fed by fiber. It's not realistic to consider that has to happen. And some wireless internet is possible in these rural areas where the density is so much lower than other areas. So between those two, but our biggest response has been from private industry. A healthcare industry in particular is looking at connecting all of their clinics via their own private network through our network. And this will allow them to be able to do that and not have to rely on an internet service provider.
And will this cover all of Bradford County?
Yes.
So $10 million investment to build out this middle mile in Bradford County with the hopes of getting a private investment to come in either through some company to come forward and say, we're going to build that last mile out, either fiber optic, wireless antennas or whatever. It's beyond my comprehension. I looked to Dennis on this one. But, so we're looking at $10 million for Bradford County. I know that you said that Susquehanna County is beginning now. They have a $175,000 study.
Just for the study. They authorized $175,000 of county funds to be used as match, so another $175,000, so roughly $350,000 to do a study to look at the poles, the areas of the county that would be best served by this type of a network.
And that is the expected amount of investment to be somewhat in that same ballpark, around 10 million, give or take.
Give or take.
Roughly.
Probably a little bit more because of the more rural nature.
So at least 10 million probably then.
Yes.
So slightly north of that. Okay, because, my area down in Luzerne County, the area I represent, we do have access. That's not our issue. Certainly people complain about, sometimes the quality as well and dealing with the cost of what it is in our area versus what the cost is in other more urban areas. That's certainly something I hear about. And I'm certainly, listening to the issues of if there's something we can do to help incentivize this. I think there's a number of different ideas that are out there, be it all from a tax credit system to a surcharge system to something and maybe that's even something that we can allow open to the commissioners to help recoup some of the costs that you're investing in to allow the state government to allow a surcharge to be determined from the county level to do something like that to reimburse this and maybe encourage other counties to build out this middle mile. Just food for thought as I'm just thinking out loud, but just wanted to make those comments. Thank you.
Chairman Millard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, you and all of the panelists have certainly identified the benefits of doing this, whether it's with regard to education, medical, economic development. You identified the middle mile. My question is going to be directed toward Mr. Adams, County Commissioner. You mentioned in your testimony the pole attachment rules and regulations, and you also mentioned the $4,000 per pole, including, the attachment, the engineering, and all of that. And I was wondering if you've had any discussion with either Rural Electric or perhaps Verizon or Frontier or whomever owns those poles. Is that $4,000 standard? Is the engineering the biggest cost here? Because I would think that in a spirit of cooperation with whomever owns the poles, that they're not new to having this type on poles. So the engineering, I would think, should be pretty standard. Is it every pole, every other pole? And my final part of the question is, if in the event of a major storm, and certainly you're in a very rural area where, you're affected by those things, who would be maintaining it?
Okay. First, the engineering, the engineering part is not really the expense. What ends up happening is a lot of, PPL is our primary provider in the northern part of our county is Penelec. What happens is the height of some of the existing poles isn't enough to meet the requirements. So that not only would they, they do the engineering and there's the certain standards, distances, power on top, and then cable next, and then fiber next, and then telephone next. All of those have engineered minimum distances between them. And if the poles, and then the minimum distance from the bottom line to the ground. Well, if the pole's not tall enough, you got to rip the pole out, put a new one in, and then attach all of the new, the old gear to it. So literally, 4 different companies are going to come in and attach per pole. That ends up being some of the reality of why it can be $4,000 a pole. And so, the engineering standard, and again, I'm not an engineer, can somehow it be squeezed? Obviously, the power has to have certain distances for safety reasons, but, cable and fiber and telephone doesn't have much, safety issue as far as, electrocuting somebody. Can they be closer so you don't have to, rip the poles out? I don't know the answer to that. And then the real reality is also, then you're in a scenario of dealing with 4 different companies who have to schedule out the time frames to, the first guy has to be the power company, the next, and so on, and the coordination that takes with private industry who are developing each one of those technologies can take months. So you wait for the 3-month period for the power company to do what they have to do, set the new pole, put the power up, and then you wait another month for the cable company, and then you wait another month for the fiber company, and you wait another month for the telephone company and so the reality is, and the expense, the time and the money are both squeezing people to say, what, we're not going to do this. And that is the exact issue of what's happening with our LSA $350,000 grant. And we required, I believe it was 25% of the fiber to be dark so that we can get further development along the way. It's not just from their hub to the Wedco Sterling Business and Technology Park. We were smart enough to say let's make sure there's capacity there for business in the community between the 15-mile run between the two. But that pole ready, it sounds simple. Well, we'll just engineer it and do it. But if you have to rip a new pole out and rip the pole out, put a new one in, and then reattach everything with 4 different companies, that's the reason for the expense.
And in the event of a catastrophic failure of one pole or a dozen in a line, whose responsibility is it to replace that fiber optic?
The pole owner is responsible for the pole itself, and then usually that's the power company in our area.
And does that involve a monthly fee to them for the use of that pole?
Oh yeah, okay. There's a monthly fee for everybody that's hanging on it. Now the pole, they'll fix the pole. If the pole comes down, the power company will come in, put the new pole in, attach their power, and then notify the cable, the telephone, and the fiber company that pole is now down. Now, then they have to go out, remove it from the broken pole, and assign it and attach it to the new pole. The power company puts the pole and takes care of the power, and then each of the other ones will then do their corresponding piece to detach from one pole, assign it, and attach it to the new one. And again, that's why the first nor'easter that we had in March took a huge section of Michael's district, Pike County, down to the point where school was closed for a week because an enormous amount of power poles actually came down in that storm. So that takes time. But to provide the first middle mile, and we've done the same thing. Our first go around was between $15 and $20 million. Wayne County happens to be the longest north to south county of any in the Commonwealth. So the distances that we have to go are certainly larger, and the topography to cover might be a little bit more difficult. But that's a $15 to $20 million loop just to bring high speed, high capacity fiber for that middle mile.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great.
Thank you. One quick question on my own part, though I have a million, but in sake of time, I'll only ask one. If About 20 years ago, most of us, if they had cell phones, were bag phones. Within 20 years, it's escalated to now iPhone 8 or whatever the number of the week is, which are basically miniature computers in our hand. I'm curious from a hospital and medical perspective, the percentage of your telecommunication interactions with patients and how that's changed in the last 10 or 20 years. Whether it's e-scripts, whether it's emails to your patients. I have a daughter who's got a child with some chronic illnesses and goes to Penn down in Pittsburgh, in Children's Hospital, pardon me. It's amazing the communication that goes on between her physician and her and all the group. And I'm just curious whether it's telemedicine, evaluating patients, how much has that changed in the last 10, 20 years?
We have adopted e-prescriptions, and we do have a patient portal that our patients interact with our providers through. They can send and receive messages back and forth. As far as online telemedicine, we don't have the capacity to provide that now.
And let me ask it more generally then. Do you see that demand growing, whether it's here or nationwide? I mean, I know that physicians can see you remotely. They can be in another state and still be able to talk to a patient at the bedside with today's technology. Is that going to continue to grow?
Absolutely.
Exponentially as we saw the phone industry?
Absolutely. It's much more convenient for primarily the patients to be in the comfort of their own home, as long as the physician has a clear view, a reliable view, and is able to interact with the patient. Absolutely.
And reducing the risk of infection and immune problems.
Exactly, exactly.
Thank you. I was curious on that. Any further questions for this panel? Well, gentlemen and young lady, we do appreciate your testimony and your time. Most of all, we appreciate the service you give to the community, and this is very helpful for those of us who live in other parts of the state to hear what's going on here in your beautiful counties. So thank you very much for having us. As we part, Representative Pickett's going to introduce the next panel. You're welcome to stay and listen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We termed that first panel the need for access, and you did a great job of overviewing that for us from a lot of aspects. The next panel we have entitled Finding Solutions. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Brian Barno with the Broadband Cable Association, Frank Buzalowski with Verizon, and Jay Summerson with Microsoft. Gentlemen? Thank you. All set? Mr. Barno, would you like to lead off?
Thank you, Chairman Pickett, members, for the opportunity to be here today. This is a little bit of somewhat of a homecoming for me. I've got, my mom is from Little Meadows, which is in Apollican Township, which is in the Bradford County, New York state line, far northwestern Susquehanna County. And my cousins still farm there in that township, and I've been doing that since Grandpa broke the land in 1917. They are served by receive high-speed broadband from Beaver Valley Cable TV, which is an operator, right, a small one in the northern tier based out of Rome, Pennsylvania. We've got a great story to tell with the broadband cable industry. A couple folks have mentioned that earlier with the panel. We've got members in the state all throughout your districts that are providing high-speed access to the internet. One of the unique things about our members, whether it be Comcast and Towanda in parts of Luzerne and Lackawanna County, or Charter Communications and Sayre, Athens, and Montrose just north of here, or Blue Ridge Cable. Tom Freeman is the general manager for Blue Ridge across Route 6. Tom is at the other hearing in Wellsboro today. Tom wanted to be here. And other members, is that wherever we have our plant and our infrastructure and our facilities, we offer high-speed access to the internet, 25.3 or higher, to everybody along that route. All right, so that's a pretty critical thing. We also obviously do an awful lot of commercial, industrial, business development, and healthcare provision of services too. So Part of what we need to do, and I kind of got that from the panel this morning, is to build on that success, and how do we expand that? The first item, which is critical, is encourage private investment. Folks at this panel, the telephone industry, the cable industry, wireless folks, have put billions of dollars into Pennsylvania in the last 25 years to build broadband infrastructure. Our members themselves, BCAP members, have put in about $8 billion in the state since the 96 Telecommunications Act to build broadband. The bottom line, we think, is that the line is that, don't do any harm. We really have a hard time with public investment going in to overbuild private providers. We had a great example a few years ago with the Federal Stimulus Act. KIMBER, the Keystone Initiative for Network-Based Education, was a $99.7 million project to build a middle-mile network in Pennsylvania for education and other purposes. That came in, was built, essentially it was an overbuild of telephone operators, cable operators, and private fiber providers when there's already an excess of fiber in certain areas of the state. So I'm not sure how many folks are receiving service for that. Our folks in Mansfield, Tom Freeman in Mansfield with Blue Ridge, had high-speed access to the internet in Mansfield in 1997 before it was available in San Francisco and New York City. Then KIMBER came in, and they essentially took the fiber project and fiber operations from Mansfield University over a private provider that's already there locally paying taxes. That kind of thing, that type of thing doesn't make any sense. Nothing will undermine the broadband future more than signaling to private investors that their returns on investment are uncertain or in jeopardy, or singling out one set of providers or one technology over another one. Second is removing barriers to deployment. I've never heard the focus on make ready in any hearing I've ever been around in the last 20 years. It's great to hear that. How do we get additional employment? The number one thing our operators will say when they come up and talk to you is not about any technology or high-tech stuff. They'll talk about pole attachments. That we've got an issue to remove barriers for pole attachments. 15, 20 years ago, you didn't hear this. Whether it's the lack of staff that the utilities have, the pole owners have to handle pole attachment requests, whether it's too many attorneys, all due respect to my fellows here, or if it's dealing with those companies are looking for another avenue for revenue generation, it's an ongoing concern and ongoing problem for our folks. And some of the examples you were given by the first panel bring that out. So we need to remove impediments so our folks and folks that put fiber up there can overlash, install customer connections, and undertake short-run extensions. Ensure pole owners employ a transparent and timely application process. The first panel talked about there's a 90-day application process. Then the utility owner will get back to us. Whether the application is in the format it needs to be or not in the format it needs to be, may put another delay on that. When it gets to a point that they do their engineering studies or they do their load studies, things that weren't done 10 years ago, and the bills start just mounting up and the time starts being delayed. So if fiber doesn't get deployed, or it's deployed to a point it's going to be a long time after the individuals want the fiber, or to a point that our members, and I can give you a whole bunch of examples, that said, listen, we looked at this, we're going to do this extension off of our plant, but we can't do it now because of the cost of the make-ready and the cost of the utility attachments. Provide joint surveys for pole owners with new and existing attachers. So the pole owner will go out with the new attachers, the fiber folks, with the other people on the pole to take a look jointly at what's out there. So they can come out of that meeting with a really good information about what needs to be done to get that pole ready. And finally, prohibit pole owners from imposing costs unrelated to new attachments. And you think about what that means. One thing about that is that we've seen a number of utility companies, both in Pennsylvania and New York State, have rural areas, they've got poles out there that we want to go out and put overlash and put our fiber on. We go back and look at the pole. The pole currently does not meet safety regulations for National Electrical Safety Code. So they're wanting the new attacher to pay to bring the pole up to code before we even get on and attach our stuff there. You hear that. The other thing we talked earlier this morning about replacing poles, there are a number of operators, utility companies, I think of one electric company, I'm not going to mention the name, that we want to build broadband out to that in that area, in a rural area. They will say, listen, we've got these dilapidated poles that have been expensed out 25 years ago. We want you guys, the new attacher, to pay for the new pole. Again, that's another one of those red check marks, and we want to build our fiber out. We want to provide the service out to areas where we're not right now, but that's another huge impediment that we have. Remove tax barriers. Senator Baker mentioned the bonus depreciation issue. That's a huge issue for our folks. She talked a little bit about that. Allowing to expense network investments immediately is critical for our folks. We had an operator in Western Pennsylvania said, listen, we build our projections in for the year 2018 based on that bonus depreciation. When the state came out in late 2017 with the estimation, said, listen, we're not going to allow you to take that on the state level. They said, we've already built that into our budget. They're saying they're taking that money and going to West Virginia and New York and Ohio rather than putting that money in Pennsylvania. So I can't overemphasize how important that bonus depreciation legislation is in the state. And I'll commend the folks here in the State House for moving that along and putting that in a position, at least in the Senate, to do something. Reevaluate broadband subsidies. The CAF2, Connect America Fund 2 subsidy, it seems like a good program that we've looked at thus far. One thing it does is look at unserved areas rather than underserved areas. Look at areas that currently don't have broadband. That should be the priority. So we're pleased with that. The governor's initiative to kick in $35 million of PennDOT dollars into supporting entities in Pennsylvania that have received CAF2 funding, I think is a good idea. It's not a lot of money, but it's a start, and that's progress. As you know, the new director of broadband initiatives for the governor's office is Mark Smith, a former Bradford County commissioner, and he's done a good job. He's done a good job, as much as anything, reaching out and asking questions and listening, and we appreciate that attitude coming from the administration. Again, the priority being unserved areas that we need to focus on. The other item I'll talk about with subsidies is the State Universal Service Fund. Pennsylvania has a USF which has gone from $29 million to about $34 million a year. That's arguably the most unaccountable fund in the state. The fund originally was set up to help small rural telephone companies provide service in high-cost areas. Seems to make a lot of sense. But what's happened is that the amount of money these companies received last year, 5 years ago, 12 years ago, has been exactly the same year after year after year with no accountability. Where's the money going? While we don't have a problem with the money going to small rural telephone companies that are using it, investing it locally, we've seen examples of larger carriers like Windstream, CenturyLink, and Frontier taking that money, which is designed for the rural areas, and reinvesting in areas where they have competition. All right, so there are areas in the state that don't have 1.5 meg, have 1.3 or less. USF should help that process, but we've seen too many examples when it did not. And that's an issue. We just think that the national companies, the big national companies, those three, Windstream, CenturyLink, and Frontier, should not be receiving state USF money. They're getting naming rights for stadiums. They're doing multi-billion-dollar purchases around the country. It doesn't make any sense to continue that program. Question outlandish promises. We've seen a lot of examples around the country, some in Pennsylvania, that providers coming in or potential providers coming in and making these great promises. We can provide great broadband. We can do it at a lower cost than the private providers are doing it. We can give you higher bandwidth. And they ask the question, why do these initiatives fail? First off, the guys my buddies and I that were hanging drywall last week are not going to go out and do a broadband project. But there are folks, it's a little bit of a stretch of the imagination, but there are folks out there that have proposed broadband projects, wireless companies, wireline companies in the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, overbuilding the phone company, overbuilding the cable operator, that didn't have the financial wherewithal or the technical wherewithal to be able to do that. There's been a great examples of municipalities and local governments and counties investing in some of these players that really couldn't deliver on what their promises are. When you're looking at entities out there that are potentially talking about building a middle mile or a last mile project, who are they? Do they have experience working with customers? Do they had 5 years in the business? Do they have back office support? Do they have computer tech support? If they say, listen, we're going to build fiber for you, but Corning Fiberglass has never heard of them before, they're not going to get the funding for it. So there's some details that going with people who already do what they do, this build fiber, build broadband, got some experience, track record successfully in this arena are the important folks to go after. Taking a comprehensive approach on adoption. Census Bureau, FCC, Pew Research, other folks have confirmed the most significant barrier to adoption is the number of digital relevance and digital literacy issues. Even where we have the highest level broadband, not everybody takes broadband. Personal reasons, financial reasons, other reasons. We have to, as a state, I think, do a better job educating folks. What are the values of broadband? How can we use it to increase education? How can you use it for mom and dad to go back to school when they're home? How do we use it to start that small business? But again, too few people are taking broadband in areas where it's offered right now. So that's one of the things we need to look at. It's going to help our efforts as we go forward. BCAP members are committed to providing broadband in small town and rural Pennsylvania. We look forward to continuing the work with the House Policy Committee, and I'll look forward to your questions at the end of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. You always do a great job.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the House Policy Committee. My name is Frank Buzatlowski. I'm the Director of State Government Relations for Verizon in Pennsylvania. In that capacity, I deal with the General Assembly and the executive branch of the Commonwealth on all matters relating to Verizon, landline, wireless, and internet, representing all Verizon corporate entities. I want to take a moment to thank the superintendent for being a Verizon wireless customer. But Doctor, maybe could I use your office to make a cell phone call? When I'm finished. Okay. Well, use that booster. I've been with Verizon and its predecessor companies, Bell Pennsylvania and Bell Atlantic, for over 30 years, and I've spent the last 24 years of my career in state government affairs. And I want to say I'm very proud that my career has allowed me to stay so long with an organization that has such a rich history in our state, and that it reaches into the very fiber of our local communities. I take pride in having traveled this Commonwealth to every corner of it, and to experience firsthand, listening to customers and constituents talk about their service issues and so on and so forth. And I can't let Brian be the only one with local connections. I mean, so I'm maybe not as close, but I go back to my great-grandparents on my mom's side who working farm in Sweet Valley, and my wife now wants to build and represent Boback's district. So, and also my mom was from Luzerne County, so spent many times, probably half my childhood upstate, as we call it. Verizon has over 8,000 employees and 38,000 shareholders living in this Commonwealth. So we're very dedicated to this Commonwealth and have a tremendous amount of investment here. We have thousands of buildings and locations throughout Pennsylvania. We have landline central offices and remote terminals, wireless towers, and cell sites. But we don't cover every part of Pennsylvania. On the landline side, we actually only serve about 50%, about one half of the geography of the Commonwealth. The rural local exchange carriers, or the R-Lex as we fondly call them, cover the other half. In this area of northeast Pennsylvania, you really need a map and a guide to show you which landline company serves which area. On the wireless side, we overlap and we compete with our brethren at the cable companies with AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, TracFone, and many, many other carriers and competitors. So when we're talking about broadband or high-speed internet service, there are a myriad of providers, competitors, of which Verizon is just one. Many of you may remember, those of you on this committee, when you passed House Bill 30. It became Chapter 30 of the Public Utility Code. And that was signed into law in December of 2004. Your predecessors and those of you who were in the legislature in 2004 were really ahead of your time. When you passed that bill, you made Pennsylvania the only state in the United States to have a plan and a mandate to provide high-speed internet service to every single resident. Under that law, Verizon invested billions of its own dollars in the Commonwealth and brought broadband technology to all urban, suburban, and rural communities in our landline territory and provided the residents and businesses in those communities with high-speed internet service. And we did that without one dime of government money. We at Verizon have been 100% compliant with the mandates in Chapter 30 since the fall of 2015, which is we finished a few months ahead of the schedule that was required by the state. And to meet our obligation, we deployed an array of services that includes DSL and 4G LTE fixed wireless, and for a very small percentage of our customers, satellite internet service, which we only use for the rare customer who is too far from an LTE cell tower or a copper line that carries a high-speed internet signal. Today, any Verizon customer, landline customer, can call 1-800-VERIZON and order internet service for his or her specific location. To accomplish that, we invested over $16 billion in capital investment. We deployed 4.5 million lines of fiber optic cable. We made our inter-office facilities 100% fiber optic. We deployed fiber optics to connect our central switching offices to 2,500 remote terminals to bring high-speed internet technology to our communities. Our fiber optic lines also provide backbone service, the middle mile, if you will, to bring 4G LTE wireless to Pennsylvanians using the cell towers. And we deployed 190 4G LTE cell towers in rural Pennsylvania. But looking in the rearview mirror, it's amazing how much things have changed in such a relatively short period of time. When House Bill 30 was enacted, there weren't any smartphones. There weren't iPads. There were no tablets. There was no Facebook or Twitter. Cable telephony was in its infancy. Voice over internet, voice over IP, services such as Skype, Vonage, Magic Jack were barely heard of. And not many people would have imagined giving up a landline in favor of just using a cell phone. Chapter 30 was negotiated in the time when everybody had a landline, and nobody imagined that there would come a day when the overwhelming majority of people wouldn't have a landline from, quote, the phone company. And that's an important point to emphasize because, as one of the previous panelists had talked about, subsidies. The old regime of urban and suburban subsidizing rural worked well under the old rules, but those subsidies have dried up. Allow me to share with you a few statistics. In 1999, Pennsylvania's incumbent local exchange carriers, we call the ILECs, that's Verizon and the rural companies, served 8.5 million landlines. And your constituents didn't really have many options other than the, quote, phone company. But by the end of 2017, the ILECs served less than 3 million of those lines. And even the customers who continue to use landlines have plenty of choices. In Pennsylvania, competitive local exchange carriers, or CLECs, cable companies together now serve about 50% of all the landlines in the state, 57% of business landlines. And if you again think in terms of the old subsidy, you make more money in the business arena than you do in the residence arena because they're naturally higher higher bills, more usage, and so forth. When you add wireless to the mix, and remember, you have your 4 major carriers and all the resellers, the percentage of lines now provided by the Pennsylvania incumbent telephone companies is a little less than 15%. I'd like to conclude my remarks by saying that Verizon's goal, my personal goal, is to provide excellent service to your customer, to our customers, to your constituents. And if your constituent is having trouble getting high-speed internet and lives in Verizon landline territory, and that's an important distinction, which is why I wanted to, a little bit of the history there, bring that to my attention. Many of you, Representative Fritz and others, Representative Pfeiffer, Representative Pickett, in the Sarah area, have often come to me with constituent A who can't get service or is having trouble getting service. And we will deal with that. Frequently, people do get confused as to, well, I can't get DSL. Well, but maybe you could get fixed wireless. Because I will say also as a concluding remark that wireless is here and it's the future, and with 5G coming, which would provide even higher speeds than we put over our FiOS network, you're going to see even more deployment of wireless. So on behalf of my company or my fellow employees and retirees, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you, and I'll be happy to answer questions after our panel has concluded its testimony.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Jay Summerson, and I'm a Senior Director of Government Affairs at Microsoft. I just want to thank Mr. Chairman and members of the Policy Committee for inviting us to be here today. It's a very interesting topic for us, and we certainly do have some thoughts, pretty much as an outsider, but nonetheless think those thoughts are important to share today. Our corporate mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. So you're probably thinking, what's that software company doing here serving on a panel talking about broadband? And we're very passionate about a number of different areas that fall outside of our normal course of business of developing software and hardware. We launched a broadband initiative last July that we're calling R-Band, and our goal is to serve with partners 2 million people in rural America who are currently unserved by July 4th, 2022. I think as a company, we see this as more of an opportunity gap. I know we spent a lot of time talking about the broadband gap, but we think of it as, what are the opportunities that people are currently missing out on here in the U.S. One of the things that really struck me in thinking about what to say at this panel discussion today is, we talk a lot about education and the gaps that occur in education today, whether it's lack of specific curriculum like computer science in some high schools, but the effects of lacking in broadband on students in some parts of this country it's just unbelievable. So one statistic that I would share is 70% of teachers in K through 12 today assign homework to students that requires a broadband connection to complete, whether it's filling out certain forms or doing certain research. But we still have 5 million students in the country that lack broadband access. So what do those students do? Are they permanently left behind? I think it's a question that needs to be answered and certainly rectified very quickly. Our broadband strategy is a little different. We're not interested in becoming a telecommunications company. We're looking to partner with others that have significant experience in this space. I shared with you a white paper that we released last July that kind of charts out our strategy. We recognize that there are companies that have been providing telecommunication services for not just decades, but over a century in this country. And we want to leverage their expertise but at the same time partner with them, offering a new technology that can provide broadband in these areas that are currently unserved today. So as Frank had mentioned, there's a lot of promise in wireless technologies, one of which that we've done a tremendous amount of research on in the last 10 years and have actually deployed this technology in very rural parts of other parts of the globe, and we're now bringing this here to the U.S. is one called TV white spaces technology. So TV white spaces technology, if you just think about it in very simplistic terms, it's unused, unlicensed spectrum in those TV bands below 700 megahertz on the wireless spectrum. I'm not a wireless engineer or a spectrum expert, so I can't go a lot deeper than that, but think about if you're still getting broadcast TV content, those are the channels that you're leveraging, and those are the channels that we would like to use with partners in delivering this broadband service. The advantages that we see in leveraging TV white spaces technology is that it's less expensive to deploy because the signal travels over greater distances and is not impeded as much by obstacles like buildings, foliage, and very rural areas that have a lot of trees. So there's a real benefit in having the broadband delivered this way because it can reach outwards of 10 miles from a base station. So think about the area that you would cover in a rural area with 10-mile radius out from that base station. We're looking for partners. As I said, we don't have this expertise in actually being a broadband provider, but we would actually make investments with these partners to provide the broadband and serve as a kind of a technical expert on TV white spaces technology. So in thinking about what policymakers could do to actually help us, whether it's in Pennsylvania or in other states that we're looking at, we need help connecting with potential partners. So unlike Frank, I didn't grow up in Pennsylvania. We have an employee base in Pennsylvania, but it's not nearly as deep and as rich and with the history of Verizon and their predecessor companies. So, we're looking for some guidance. We're looking for some connections to companies that might want to deliver broadband differently, potentially less expensive than how they're looking at delivering it today. And don't get me wrong, fiber is the gold standard, and certainly the promises of 5G are unbelievable, but in areas where you cannot do that today and maybe even 10 years or 15 or 20 years from now, we think that you need to look at some other options. So that concludes my testimony. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's actually very informative and a nice balance of different perspectives and viewpoints and experience. We will start questioning with Representative Boback and then Representative Pfeiffer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to learn because I've been fielding questions for a while now from my constituents, many from very rural areas of the state, who do get coverage, but it's very poor and it's very slow. And they have children in school who can't do their homework, or they want to enjoy games like they see advertised on TV. They can't do the games because of the slow mechanisms that they have. And of course, that was substantiated by Lauren, who gave testimony, and I think you were all in the audience to hear the first testifiers. So I guess what I'm looking for is, and some of you gave compelling testimony as to where we can go from here, what we can do, but I guess I'm looking at it from an aspect of why isn't there more competition? In other words, we heard earlier some companies were named that are not providing the services that the constituency needs and lacks. So why aren't you going in competitively? Is it because there aren't enough people there to make it worth your while? Or my feeling is it's an investment not only in the Commonwealth but in the nation. To that point was Joe Adams, who gave wonderful, brilliant testimony from Wayne County saying, Look what we can do. We're 2 hours from New York, 2 hours from Philadelphia. Look what we have the capability of, and yet 59 out of 67 counties, that's really poor. Losing people as far as employment, as far as opportunities, business opportunities, 59 out of 67 communities, counties in the state. So it's almost, I guess, I'm offering or issuing or requesting a challenge. I mean, why aren't companies coming in? Because I can't help believe, with the capabilities that we have in the Commonwealth, the people are there, the students want more, the medics need more, we all need more, we want more entrepreneurs, we want more business. So if you build it, they will come. And that's truly what I believe. If you build it, they'll come. So I'm looking for answers in that regard. Where do we go from here? How do we make it more competitive? You're looking for more money. I was disappointed. I'm not familiar with Act 30, Buzz, that said you need to provide high-speed service. So that was then. So what has changed? Does that need to be amended? Because certainly the high-speed service of 2003 is not what we're looking at now in 2018. So I know I'm all over the board with my questions, but the bottom line is need more competition, need more providers, and build it. We want to be at the forefront in this Commonwealth of providing services and providing more jobs and more opportunities, being so close to major networks like Philadelphia and New York. Help me with this.
Well, let me go first, because I'm coming from and by the way, it's a great panel because of the different perspectives here, because, Verizon, Bell, started as a monopoly. So we have an entirely different perspective than Microsoft and cable companies would have. And for competition comes at us. It comes to us. So I've seen us go from, when I first started, we weren't a monopoly, but we're pretty close to it, to now, today, where, you can get service from so many different providers. And the free market does work. It works well. But what happens is when you get into the rural areas, they are just by nature more expensive to deploy. Now, in our landline footprint, and I want to distinguish between, our 50% of Pennsylvania, versus the rural companies, because they are franchises. We don't go outside. We don't venture into frontier territory as far as, our landline aspect, and they don't come into ours, okay? So speaking from where we were, and to get a little bit of history, when we were doing House Bill 30, when you were legislating and I was lobbying the legislature, United Telephone, I don't know if anybody remembers them, but it's an R-Lec, they thought that the minimum speed requirement should be 768 kilobits per second, because who the heck would ever use 1 million, let alone 1.5 million bits per second, which is 1.5 megs? That was the mindset back then. Because all the things, and that's why I talked about in my testimony, the things that didn't exist back then now draw tremendous bandwidth. My nephew is on gaming, he's in the Air Force, and he's using tremendous bandwidth when he does that. Kids at home, students now uploading videos or whatever they're doing their homework, using tremendous bandwidth, was never contemplated. So the state law, as distinguished from the new definition of high speed, okay, goes back to those days. And that's why it's 1.5 megs. Now, the FCC relatively recently redefined the definition of high-speed internet upwards. We could debate what the actual number should be, but clearly people want more bandwidth or more speed, higher speed. Now, on the wireless side, where we use our Verizon Wireless 190 towers that are LTE, we can get those higher speeds. So people who are within range of a Verizon Wireless LTE tower, which the most are, they can get those speeds. But if you're not in that range and you're depending on the landline and you're depending on DSL, now you're over copper wire. And it's the same thing we all learned when we were kids. You can't string too many extension cords together. Why? Because the resistance of copper, the more length, the longer it is, the more resistance, ergo you can't, safety hazard in electricity. Well, it's not a safety hazard on our end, but what happens is the signal, which is a low voltage signal, diminishes. So the speed, by the time you get to the end of the line, in 1.5 megs, 2 megs, maybe 3 in some of these locations is the max. So if you don't have an LTE tower and you're dependent upon that copper wire, in many, many cases, we're at the maximum. And the only way to go higher within our network would be to replace it, and now you're back to what the expense is to be able to do that. To be candid, it's a business decision, and it's we've been pushing more and more fiber out into the network and higher speed equipment and so forth, but there's just a lot of room to make up. And that's where competitors come in too. I mean, I hate to say it, hate to admit it, but Charter Communications or Comcast or something, they come in and sometimes they eat our lunch because we're offering 1.5 megabits to a customer, and they come in and they can offer 100 because there's a different technology and different bandwidth and so forth. And with that, maybe Brian want to talk about the competitive aspect, and Jay.
I think the final solution here will be a combination of technologies. Our members are going down to 12 to 15 homes a mile. When it gets below that, the costs just don't justify the capital investment to put it out there. We want to serve it. There are folks out there that really want the service. They like what we do, but the money isn't there to do that. So one of the things about some of these subsidy programs is how do we bridge that gap? How do we make 5 or 7 homes a mile economically available for a provider, a private company to come in and do that? I think that's a great idea. Look at unserved areas and how do we find a way to provide service there. There are some areas of this state they're not going to get fiber to the home ever. It'll be a 4G or 5G solution, which is going to be great. Probably the best thing they're going to get. But other areas are going to get fiber. In our new builds, we're building pretty much fiber to the home because fiber is less expensive now than building traditional coaxial cable. So we're in a competitive mode. Obviously, our video product, traditional cable TV is not a revenue maker for us anymore because of the over-the-top providers. And my kids get Netflix and Hulu and a variety of other services. They don't have a video connection at all. So they rely on their broadband connectivity, but they don't again, getting the cable. So our economic model within our industry has changed. But again, we're looking at how do we expand our plan? How do we capitalize and get that investment back? One of the points was made earlier today in the first panel dealt with an economic development or a economic development site they want to get fiber in. And we've been asked can you guys put fiber in this site in central Pennsylvania? There's no fiber there. We have a business park or business development park. And the first question we ask, are there electric and gas and other utilities there? We get the response, well, no, we want you to put the fiber in. Well, if there are customers there that have more than 5 or 10 or 15, the need for 5 or 10 or 15 high-speed connections, we'll build the fiber there. But there's the economics are we don't have a cash cow in our back pocket that we can go out and do that funding. We need the return on investment to make that investment. If the market is there, if the business is there, we're going to build to it, and we'll find a way to partner with Verizon or someone else to do it. But we need, again, the bottom line is the revenue return. But from an incentive standpoint, how do you bridge that gap? How do you make it incentivize these companies to step in and do that in areas they're not doing it now?
Just may I? So that if you had these development organizations like we heard from in the beginning, if they guarantee that they could bring X amount of businesses, providing that they would have the electricity, the water, et cetera, you would come in. I mean, that would be a great pilot program to see if, in fact, it would work, again, to bring them in.
There are trucking terminals up and down Interstate 81 that didn't have any facilities built to them. They built the facility, or they're building a facility. They have a huge demand for fiber, huge demand for broadband. We'll find a way to get it to them. So we're looking for business.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Representative Pfeiffer, then Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Chairman, and I just want to say thank you for traveling here today. You can see that this is a challenging issue for all of us, and we understand, from our schools and from an economic development standpoint, it's just a challenge that we face. So thank you, and I've learned a lot here as well. I also want to thank Elk Lake School District. Last time I was here, I was across the street on a very similar day, playing the great game of baseball in a snow squall. So it was not an easy day, and it kind of feels the same way here today. But it is a beautiful school. You've done great work here, and congratulations to you. Yeah, well, thank you. You've done a great job here. Mr. Barno, you talk a little bit in your testimony, and you highlighted this at the end of your testimony. You talk about digital relevance and digital literacy issues facing, your client base. Can you just expand on those a little bit?
It comes down to take rates. Obviously, we have a product. We like everybody to take our product. But even in areas where we have 100 meg downstream, great accessibility, everybody doesn't take the product. There are folks that resist that in the sense that maybe it's too expensive. That might be a possibility. Or maybe that they're concerned about bringing what's on the internet into their homes. Maybe they don't need the internet for their job, or they don't see the relevance that the internet will provide. So even in areas of the state that have great internet accessibility, take rates are not where they should be. And that's something actually our Steve Samara, our Pennsylvania telephone person, will say all the time, that even where we have broadband, take rates aren't where they need to be. So,
but isn't that changing? Isn't that changing every day? We're sitting in a school. Our students in today's world, that's how they're learning. It's their curriculum. Aren't you seeing changes to that?
No question, we're definitely seeing changes.
So we're sitting here in a school, and we can't give a student homework because they can't, do homework at their, the old days of homework. The blackboard's gone, right? So we need this if we're going to stay competitive and from an economic standpoint. If we're going to give our children opportunities, we need this. And again, thank you. But that's changing every day. I look at my children, where they are from a literacy standpoint when it comes to their handheld, and they can do more in their hands than I ever could. Trust me. It's unbelievable. But that's their lifetime.
I agree,
right?
but there's still an opportunity and a need to put the word out there. With, again, as younger kids come along, they're used to the internet, or they're used to having high speed or digital accessibility. But we need to keep educating people in the community about how valuable the internet is.
Okay. We talked a little bit today, and I have not looked into the governor's proposal. I know we talked a little bit about it initially, but have you the three of you looked at the governor's proposal? Is it helpful? Is for all of you? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think it's helpful. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think they're relying essentially on the Connect America Fund 2 reverse auction, which essentially they're going into areas that are unserved by census block and identifying those areas and putting a matching, CAF matches the number for that, and the providers come in and say, listen, what can we expect to put investment in that area, and they work out a formula on that. So what the state would do if an entity, and say a cable operator or a phone company, applied to CAF2, receive CAF2 money from the feds, the state could provide some matching money and supplement that. That's kind of what that is. So it's based on the CAF2 funding.
The governor's office has been proactive. They also reached out to me, and I think it's an aggressive initiative. And one thing Frontier said in its letter that is correct is that we can't get into discussion about the FCC CAF fund and so forth. So I'll leave that at that. But I will say this, that I know Representative Pickett and Representative Kaufer are considering some legislative initiative that maybe would provide incentives to companies to go into the unserved or underserved areas. I'm a great believer in rather than government mandates and grants, maybe tax incentives or other ways to get that kind of deployment increased in the areas that need it.
So basically, if we would offer tax credits to certain areas that are underserved, you would bid on those based upon those credits available to you? I mean, because look, if people aren't here, there's a reason they're not here now. They're not coming here. We know they're not coming here, so we're at a standstill. And I think Mr. Summerson basically said it best, that it might take a group of different conglomerates or different agencies to figure out how to provide a service to these areas. But at some point, as a Commonwealth, we might have to offer the tax credits, which I think the federal government also offers these tax credits, as an incentive for someone to go into an area that they would not willingly go. Is that accurate?
That's an accurate statement, but the devil's always going to be in the details, and you have to see what the plan is.
Did
what the
Act 30 have
incentives are.
incentives for you? Obviously, you said it was all your capital investment. Were there tax credits from the federal government or from the state government?
No, there
for
were
Verizon to expand throughout all of Pennsylvania?
No, there were no tax credits. There were no dollar incentives. What it was we were. This is going back in the day now, we were a rate-based rate of return telephone company, meaning that we'd go to the Public Utility Commission and say, here's our expenses, and ask them for a rate increase. It was antiquated, and the legislation changed that to a price cap, eliminated the whole rate-based rate of return, Public Utility Commission review, so on and so forth. And then lightened the regulatory burden. And then, as part of that, there was a commitment that we bought into, so to speak, signed up to modernize our network. And that was the essence of Chapter 30.
All right, great, thank you. Mr. Summerson?
So we think it's very important for some form of public-private partnerships to exist in really kind of addressing the 19+ million rural Americans without service. The expense of getting facilities out to some of these people is always going to be cost prohibitive with certain technologies. And, so that's why we're stepping up with, a small piece, trying to address 2 million of the 19+ that don't have service by making some capital investments into projects that our partners would launch. But we've seen in other states, I'm from upstate New York, we've seen in other states where funds have been created to supplement money that comes out of this Connect America Fund, and it's made a huge difference. And I think New York's probably the state that's come up with the most money over a period of 3 years of grants there. They've allocated $500 million. Not every state can do that. And,
And New York has the same type of rural character, upstate New York.
Upstate New York, yeah, absolutely.
Same type of rural, and they all obviously have better service because of that investment.
The deployments haven't been completed yet, but the expectation is that by the end of this calendar year, maybe end of 2019, that everyone will have some form of access. And it could be fiber, it could be wireless, it could be fixed wireless, it could be satellite. We were obviously late with our initiative, so none of our partners in New York will be able to actually leverage that. But, we're still going to move forward with it.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Fritz, and I think Representative Koffer has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take a quick moment to extend appreciation to Alex from my office, as well as Jason from Representative Pickett's office. They worked behind the scenes, and this came together very, very well. Same theme of appreciation and shout out to Dr. Davis, as well as the administration here at Elk Lake for hosting. And as well, I want to thank the team for coming together for such an essential cause. It really, in my eyes, boils down to this, that quality, reliable broadband is a basic necessity for quality of life and everyday conduction of business, and honestly ranks right up there with running water and electricity. Buzz, I want to direct a curiosity towards you. And I get Verizon focusing on shareholder return and targeting the latest technology, but in particular FiOS. FiOS is your term for fiber, correct?
Fiber optic service.
Fiber optic, okay. So the expansion of FiOS, can you tell me, is that declining, is it static, or are you continuing to expand FiOS availability?
Static. The future is 5G wireless.
And our topography, how does that lend to 5G wireless?
5G, today's technology has a relatively short, covers a relatively short distance. So you would relate 5G to FiOS areas, 4G LTE, which today is out there on 190 towers. That covers much more distance and is more suitable for rural. However, rural areas. However, I would see, technology is a wonderful thing because it keeps on getting better no matter what. So, as breakthroughs happen and 5G can expand more, I think we'll see that ultimately start to make its way into rural areas, or at least starting with the towns and maybe schools and locations like that and so on and so forth. But we're in some of the areas where we're just trialing it, a 5G node only covers 2 city blocks. So imagine what happens when you go to Susquehanna County. That's not enough places to put the nodes to cover, so you have to depend upon a macro tower with 4G technology, which is good modern technology and has very high speeds.
Well, I'll just finish with this. Given the articulation of that adversity, if you kindly see fit to pass on the request to continue with the availability of FiOS, especially in rural areas. Thank you kindly.
Representative Comfort.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first question I wanted to ask, because I'm in my second term now, the Universal Service Fund that was commented on. What is that? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
It was a fund set up by the Public Utility Commission to subsidize or help high cost or telephone companies that are providing landline service, dial tone service in high cost areas, generally rural areas of the state.
So is it currently it can only be used for telephone service, or could this be repurposed for, some of the initiatives that we heard about in Bradford County or in, that seems like if we have a $34 million fund today, that to have targeted, expansion into this middle mile, which seems to be the focus of what a lot of the issue is here, especially throughout rural Pennsylvania. We're talking about how can we make the tax incentive, how can we make this additional dollar investment? Is that feasible?
It's targeted right now to
it is targeted to
correct.
Do that.
To
So
wireline dial tone service, yes.
So I would just, having listened to that certainly seems like a great potential, considering we have a fund that's already established here. Maybe we as rural legislators, I didn't even know this fund existed until a minute ago, 10 minutes ago. So that's my own lack of knowledge on it, specifically that fund.
May I offer?
Sure.
It's because it is something that we're very much involved in, starting with the creation of it. The Universal Service Fund is funded by your constituents. It's a tax on the telephone bills of Verizon customers, Comcast customers, and other cable telephony customers. Verizon customers are the largest payers. Comcast customers are the second largest group of payers. And then the monies flow to subsidize the service of the customers of the rural companies, the R-Lex like Frontier. So I would caution consideration of expanding the fund would, unless something radically changes, result in an increase on the tax on the telephone bills of the people who live in Wyoming and 44 and so on and so forth. just to pull a couple municipalities out of my head.
Well, the only reason I bring it, I mean, it seems like, that telephone technology isn't over the, it seems like that is an outdated system, the wired telephony.
If I may, because I deal with this all the time. There is a very large number, even though I talked about the tremendous decline, we've lost 55% of our landlines. But if you think about people who have landlines, they're people working from home, okay, but also an awful lot of senior citizens, and they have their landlines and they're not going to give them up. So the Universal Service Fund has served a purpose, and it keeps the price lower for those people who live in the rural telephone companies areas. If you want to explain that to broadband, you're talking about broadening. You're either talking about increasing the rates of the rural R-Lec, the frontier customer. Either their rates go up, or more money is needed, which means somebody's taxes would go up to pay for it.
Yeah, I just think that this is something that could be reviewed. I mean, I certainly get the perspective of where Verizon's coming from, where you're coming from, but just seeing that the future of technology, I got to think that we're moving towards a lot of this stuff going over fiber optic lines or the wireless systems that you were alluding to, because I know in my area there's a new one, I think it's called X Divergent or something, which is it's a wireless connectivity, high speed gigabit internet that's being discussed, and it's up and running to be able to beam internet to people's houses, which I know you alluded to that a little bit with 5G.
5G.
So, but that still requires this fiber optic line, right? But just
to connect the 5G transmitter or antenna.
Right. So it wouldn't go fiber optically wired directly into the home, but you need that fiber optic line to be run to the antenna itself to be able. Okay. Just want to make sure I understood that. And very briefly, I have one last thing for Mr. Summerson in regard to the partnerships that you alluded to. I'm a big proponent of, one of the benefits we have in Pennsylvania here is all of our colleges and universities. We have a large number of them that can partner with us in a lot of these ways of doing research. Obviously, it sounds like Microsoft has done a lot of this research already in regard to white spaces. Is Airband and white spaces, are they the same thing, or are they?
Same thing.
Same thing. Airband is just the initiative.
More of a, I guess, marketing term.
Okay, that's the marketing term for using this white spaces technology.
Correct.
Okay. So in looking to do that, you're looking for, because I thought it was interesting, as soon as you said that, both Buzz and Brian started writing that down, that you guys are looking for partners in this. What do you think is the feasibility that, and this opens it up of listening to what Jay is saying here, saying, hey, listen, we're trying to expand this, we have an incentive here. What do you think on behalf of your your organizations, do you think is this feasible to get going? I mean, I'm somewhat, if nothing else happened, I'm glad to hear that, as soon as you said that, I saw them both start writing. So it was a positive thing. But what do you need to, I know you're looking for partners, and I just trying to hear what exactly, where we can be helpful in knowing that this is a private, public-private investment that we can all get involved in to really make headway here. What are we looking for?
So typically what we look for in an ISP partner is a company that's willing to try something different, perhaps has some experience with wireless technologies, and is willing to serve in unserved communities. I mean, those are really the three components. We obviously want them to have some investment in the service themselves, because I think that certainly promotes a higher end of service as opposed to us paying for everything in terms of the capital investment necessary. So we don't exclude any current incumbents from these conversations. Just as an example, and you can certainly do some research online as well, we launched an initiative with a partner, announced it in February. It's a company called Packerland Broadband. They, over the course of our project, we'll serve in excess of 80,000 people in unserved areas of northern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. You know, they're, like I said, they're willing to try something different.
And is that a startup? Was that a startup company? No?
No, they actually have roots that go back decades.
Okay.
But the Packerland Broadband is a subsidiary of that company that goes back decades.
Representative Millard?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the purpose of this hearing today, and there are other hearings that are taking place, is to identify and provide to you information from our constituents with problem areas, underserved areas. And I think that one of the things that I gained out of this today is that there is promise, listening to your testimony. And I would say to, you know, Mr. Brown and Mr. Adams, meet Mr. Summerson and Mr. Bezlowski and Mr. Barno, because if you've listened to their testimony, you know, there's some promise here in the future. We all know that technology marches on. I worked in the power industry for 30 years, and one of the newest developments that came out in conserving energy was, of course, LED lighting. And with the wide variety of what you've offered here today, I see that as the LED in providing this service in rural and underserved areas. And I guess that, you know, what we as legislators have as a challenge before us is to take a look at the effectiveness of those tax credits, to take a look at the cost of attaching to poles and what the regulations are. And I guess that what we're looking for, what this area is looking for at the end of the day, are willing partners. Representative Coffer, you know, pressed you on if you were willing to be forming a cooperative partnership to explore new technology, explore answers to, you know, what the problems are. So I would implore each of you to have a discussion afterward, to, you know, form a quasi-alliance, if you will, talk to the other people who testified here earlier today, that they can identify some of the specific obstacles that they face. We know it boils down to money in most cases. But I think that to serve, you know, the purposes of education, the medical community and connectivity, economic development, I think that there's a win at the end of the day for everyone to have this technology available to them. And certainly, you're no strangers to providing a service to the public. It's just going to take the right recipe to do that. So again, I would encourage those further discussions among you, and we stand ready as a committee, as legislators, to work in partnership with you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well stated. I have two questions, I think, maybe one little observation. I feel like I'm dating myself, but and I remember back in the 70s when we had the energy crisis and people had to ration those types of things, trying to understand all the capacity abilities. We build things, 3 years later they're outdated, we get one phone, we got to get another one. Do we ever get to the point, or pardon me, are part of our problems with how we utilize the bandwidth, i.e., instead of people watching TV on the television, they're now able to watch it from mobile devices. Is there a limited amount of capacity that, like one of the earlier testifiers, they said it would be encouraging to, where did I write this down? Provide funding to get the middle mile available to government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private companies. And yep, that's going to be good for the economy and things like this, but even if we provide that, if the rest of people are using them for all these other things, does that eating up the capacity that we're having the same conversation 3 years down the road?
Mr. Chairman, since Verizon Wireless aspect, I'll take that first. You really get to the nub of part of the issue. When when our bandwidth, we're talking about wireless bandwidth now, when our wireless bandwidth was used for voice communications, the issue was to build more towers so that we had greater reach, so that when you went down a highway, you didn't lose a signal, and so that you can get a signal here at the school, and so on and so forth. Texting came along, used to pay per text. Now it's unlimited texting. But they're nothing compared to the bandwidth that's used to watch a video or to gaming and so on and so forth. And that sucks up a tremendous amount of bandwidth. So now our wireless engineers are spending an awful lot of time and money in what we call densification. Because the customers who are sitting there with their service, that all of a sudden it's buffering or they're not downloading something, and it's, I know, like talking to somebody in rural Pennsylvania that's at 1.5 megabits, and it takes forever to download. One of the young lady that testified earlier about how long it would take to upload something. Well, the customer complaint of the wireless device is the same, and it's because there's so many other people doing the same thing. So it's all goes, and I think Representative Millard just mentioned, it all goes to, well, how much, there's only so many capital dollars there available, how much can you invest, and you're expanding at the same time now that we're densifying. And that's I don't want to call it a conflict, I'm looking for a better word, but it's a challenge, to be able to accomplish all that. And on the landline side, I know that maybe Brian wants to talk about it also, but bandwidth is an issue on copper, big issue, because there's limitation on it. On fiber, it's not so much an issue, we have to get the fiber there, and the cable network is doing, I think, finding that, replacing coax with fiber, right?
It's maximizing your networks. One thing we didn't talk about, at least at our panel, here are job opportunities. We've got operators around the state looking for employees on everything from customer service to engineering to tech, looking for people to come out of VOTEC schools and career development schools. There are opportunities in this industry. So the computer engineering opportunities out there are just run the gamut for our folks. Then we're looking at folks with two-year technical backgrounds, high school backgrounds. So in the sense, it's an ongoing thing to manage these networks, to deliver the customer satisfaction that people are demanding for the bill that they're paying. So it's kind of an ongoing thing our folks are thinking about and talking about on a daily basis.
My second question kind of coattails on that. Again, I'm aging myself, mobile phones in my house was when my mother invested and got a 12-foot cord. And we thought that was pretty cool, that you could walk out of the kitchen, get away from mom and dad, and sit halfway into the cord was so long, in those days. But you see how fast that's changed. Now we have, if you have 3 kids in the house, there's probably 5 cell phones, mom, dad, both 3 kids. And at any one given time, they could theoretically all be doing something on that phone. If one kid's gaming, one kid's watching a TV, mom's calling whatever, and some child upstairs calling dad and telling him he needs a cookie, whatever else. I mean, times have really changed a lot. That has got to put a tremendous demand on the system. So to my question of that is, earlier testimony, we talked about trying to build out the network and try to get more poles. And again, I was like a novice, but I'm concerned that if money wasn't an issue and we're able to drop all the poles, put everyone's wires on, whether it's cable, internet, and things like this, that's probably an investment. Whoever's doing that is going to pay off over a 20-year time period, maybe longer. In 10 years from now, is that going to be obsolete and we're going to be completely wireless and we're paying off something that we're no longer using? I mean, maybe I'm overthinking things, but
no, you're not overthinking it at all. You hit the nub of another issue. Sure, obsolescence. We thought DSL, asynchronous digital subscriber line, was the greatest thing since tea and bags when we first, introduced it. Now, people want to go faster than it's capable of providing. It's always a consideration when you're investing capital dollars, whether you're going to get, well, first of all, you're going to pay back the money, and then secondly, have a return on investment. If something becomes obsolete, you're literally stuck with an investment that, it's sunk cost and it's just lost money. So you have to be very careful about that.
Yeah, I want to put a plug in for 15 to 20-foot phone cords. I've got 3 daughters, so when mom or dad were forced to answer the phone when the boyfriend called, it set a different tone rather than going in anonymously to on their cell phone in their bedroom to do it. So I long for some of those days on some of the technology. I think we're looking at a variety of technology going to solve the problem. And I think we're looking at, is technology going to be outdated? We build our systems generally with a 5 to 7 to 8 year payback rate of investment return. So I think we're looking at how do we find a way to have scalable systems so we can rebuild our systems to upgraded systems, put the electronics in the systems. We've got a node with 10 or 15 customers, and we're getting too much demand on the node, we'll split the node. So there are a lot of engineering, technological things that can be done to upgrade our systems that a little over my head, over my pay grade, but we've got engineers and tech folks that do this, and it's amazing what they've done with that plant, and the fiber just gives them more opportunities to do more.
Thank you. On behalf of the committee, I just want to say thank you to Jay and Frank and Brian, if you don't mind me being that informal. Brian, Jay, your suggestions of getting the private sector involved with that, I know Microsoft's a good testament to that, and we want to thank you for that. It's a great hearing, a lot of information. Unfortunately, the more questions we ask, the more in my brain, so I'll be thinking about this all night long. Thank you for no sleep. But I also want to thank Chairman Pickett for having us here. She's going to give some closing remarks to the members. Anything else? Very good.
Thank you, Chairman Benninghoff. Certainly, we all appreciate the Policy Committee and staff coming here today. Dr. Davis, I'm sure, took a quick note of your comment about the good jobs that are open. She'll be creating a new curriculum around that, and she'll be calling you soon. I know that she instantly took notice of that. And as legislators, we work constantly to solve problems for our constituents. That's what we do. That's what we like to do. That's what makes our job very interesting and important to us to be able to solve those problems for our constituents. In thinking about some of the comments that were made about talking about new investments and new investment partners, and with Mr. Summerson adding that aspect to today, we will be working hard to be partners also, but stay close to us so that we are good partners and not partners adding obstacles or impediments, as government can find a way to do sometimes. So absolutely stay close to us, stay in tune with us. And I want to thank everybody today who came here, actually came here to be in the middle of nowhere to discover that we are actually somewhere here in the 110th district, right next to the 111th district, and in Susquehanna County, and all of this rural area that we all represent today by the various members that are here. So thank you so much, all of you, for the incredible effort and the information that you've brought us today. Highly valuable, and as the chairman said, it only brings us more questions and more things, but that is how we move forward, so thank you so much.
To close us out, thank you to the audience for being here. This stuff is streamlined. You can also go on the websites for each of our offices. If you have further questions, feel free to communicate. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.